I want to ask you about tension. So, yeah, I mentioned that like when this podcast started, I mainly had body workers on, and the first question I would ask everybody is, "What do you think tension is?" Because it's a word that body workers use constantly, and it's often like actually not that defined, and the way people use it tends to not be that technical and physiological. So I think it's really interesting to hear how body workers relate to it. I actually didn't know that you had this sort of touch background, but just
Yeah.
it's obvious like we are working with the body so much in the acting world, like it's obviously very relevant to acting too. And I'm curious, like I'm not asking you for a dictionary definition, I'm asking what is your sort of personal way of relating to tension in the body, what that means.
Well, um, that's a really great question. And it is something that I have asked before because in voice and breath work, which is a form of body work, there's a lot of focus on releasing tension. You hear that a lot. And anytime I was taught something, bless my heart, I would always be like, I'm not cynical, but I'm skeptical. That's probably healthy. But I understood there was tension, and I understood it felt good to release it. I do know this, but I also understood that tension is very necessary, and if we demonize tension, then it will solidify, of course. And the minute I say I'm going to get rid of your tension is the minute you're going to hold on to it and say, "Don't take what's mine." So it can be very tricky. And so tension, the way that I understand tension, the way I've seen it released, and the way I've understood it in my body. The first thing I'm going to do is recognize that tension is the natural result of living in a world that's complicated. And so tension are ways that we protect ourselves, perhaps. Tension can also be, of course, the remnants of a traumatic experience as solidified in the fibers of the muscle. So you get in a car wreck and you do like this, and a great deal of it releases, but microscopic fibers in the muscles do not release. The chemical that initiated that tension remains. And so that can be released in touch and massage. And you see people crying or laughing and they don't know why. And so there can be a physiological release of a literal tension, if by tension, the tightening of a fiber or muscle, often caused by a chemical release in the brain at a moment of traumatic experience. And so when that chemical is re-released into the body, it is associated then with the moment that put it there, and we have a release, or we have a recall of some sort. And so tension released can release also the experience of that tension, excuse me, the experience that caused the tension in the body. Tension in that way, then I suppose, is a physical experience, is physical expression of an actual lived experience. And so the tension in your shoulders that's habitual or that is under the surface could be literally the body's memory of an event. Now, there are people who speak way more intelligently about that than me, but I've seen it and I believe there's truth to it. Other forms of tension, though, can be quite helpful to us. Of course, we need tension to resist gravity and to exist. And so the more nuanced we're willing to be around the nature of tension in one's body, I think the freer the person feels to release what it is they feel is theirs. And let's be honest, I mean, some of us are addicted to the traumatic tension in our body, and we do not want to let it go because many of us feel we're defined by the things that have happened to us. And if you take that from my body, then I don't know who I am. And so in the release of tension, we have to be very careful. We can't, I have found that a person will not release anything they're not necessarily willing to release. I can't make you release anything because you're holding on to it. But something in you perceives that this is beneficial to hold on to. And so if we demonize it, then we're teaching the person that they're holding on to bad things. Why are you doing that? You're so stupid. But if we glorify it, we don't give them the opportunity to release it. We can enable their addiction to it. And so it's a very gentle approach to tension in the body that both honors its presence and equips the person, empowers the person to release it should they choose to do so. But tension not chosen to be released, or tension that is not willingly released, and willingly release, the willing release of tension can be because I showed up for the session, I showed up for the massage. I mean, it doesn't have to be like here it is, and I'm consciously letting it go. Um, I find touch is helpful in releasing tension, but it's not necessary. You can have dialogues with your body. You can find a place of tension, and you can ask your body to surrender. Surrender again. You can breathe into that space, which of course physiologically increases the blood flow in that space. You can use heat, which does the same thing, or cold, of course, it's just the opposite. But and so there's many ways to help the body feel better. And sometimes releasing tension is a way to do that. But as you've brought up too, tension is a multifaceted word, and we have to be careful using it, because we could just be like, you should let your shoulders go. You got so much tension in your shoulders. Why is that there? I mean, and we say those things, and sometimes anecdotally, it's just fine. It's like, oh my gosh, relax. But subtly speaking, if the teacher says you have tension in your shoulders, the teacher, the healer, whoever, if I just say you have tension in your shoulders, what the person may hear is, oh my God, I'm not good at releasing. You don't like me. I'm no good at this. It's just one more thing I'm not good at. I mean, that's not what's being, and so in this way, the healer, the teacher must always remember that what somebody hears is more important than what you say. Always. And so it's the same with tension. And we brought that up last night in terms of directing, that what they hear is more important than what you say. And so if I just say, release your tension, you're going, the fuck are you talking about? Anyway, that was a great question. I just kind of spoke. I don't know what I said, or if that was helpful.
It is helpful. I really like what you're saying about not pushing people to release it. Like, this is a really big pet peeve I have in the bodywork world, that I feel like this is where I see a lot of dominance in the bodywork world, is trying to force tension out of people's bodies without
Yeah.
really deeply listening to the body and what it's, not just like why the tension is there, but like what's happening in a more zoomed out way, that the body has this whole intricate complex process, and maybe it's just not time for that specific tension yet. Um, so with acting, like, if I'm gonna go on stage and I notice that like I'm feeling very tense in my chest, for example, we've talked a little bit about how it's okay to show up exactly as I am. I can try to work that into my character. One of the most interesting things I've found so far with acting and with your approach is it feels like dancing with tension,
Mm.
or like
Oh,
having this intricate play with it where it's hard to describe, but it's like not trying to release it, but it's also not holding it. And I think that something that I'm really interested in when I meet various teachers is like cues that they give, like
mm,
pithy, powerful cues that are actually very helpful for their students. And one that you give often is soften.
soften. Yeah.
Yeah, and to me that strikes a really nice balance where it's not saying like relax, release
Yeah.
all your
Yeah. That's the
don't
worst thing you can say to anybody. Yeah.
but it is asking for something in terms of like awareness of what's there and sort of letting it be seen, I guess, is another way of thinking
Mm.
about it, or dancing with it, or playing with it on stage, or whatever. Um, yeah, I guess, like, what would you say to somebody who is performing or even just practicing by themselves their acting practice and like noticing tension in a specific part of their body?
Yeah. That was wonderful reflection there. Thank you. Um, the dance thing you're talking about is very profound, I think. In fact, there was a time when we called our process a dance. And I find that the dance is, I'm not really great at dancing, but anyway, when I see it, it's beautiful, because you're seeing a relationship in a dance. A dance is a description of a relationship in so many ways. And it's a relationship that seems to be rooted in some form of reciprocity, where if I move this way, you follow, and if you move that way, I follow. And there seems to be the physical expression of a shared impulse between at least two people in a dance, or one person and themselves in a dance. And so I think this description that you're saying about one's relationship to tension in acting is a dance. And I think that's a great way to say it. To see it any other way is to either be dominated by my tension, or to try and dominate my tension by being like, go away, you're no good, or I'm gonna ignore you. I'm in charge here. Or like you said, to surrender to the tension and be like, oh, that's being dominated by the tension. Neither one are going to be helpful. So the non-dominant approach would be to do as you're suggesting, to dance with it, to soften with it. And the reason I think softening is such a good reminder is because I'm not going to go to war with it, and I'm not going to surrender to it either. I'm going to soften to it. And in other words, I'm going to give it the dignity of being heard as well. Tension sometimes arrives in the actor, before they go on, of course, as a response to some perceived conflict. The conflict of performing in front of others. Maybe there's a belief that this isn't going to be good, or I'm not going to be good, or there's a fear that they're not going to, all of the things that could happen. So the perceived conflict creates tension in the body that's protective. So I'm going to protect my heart, my chest is going to tighten. And in this, my body's doing its job, as you know, of course. And so if I soften to it, and I just tell myself to soften, I'm not telling myself to get rid of the tension. I'm not denying or invalidating the response of my body's response to this moment. I'm just saying soften to my own tension. I'm softening to the moment. And a softened body has a hard time resisting. A softened presence has a hard time fighting. And in that, I come to discover that if it exists, it belongs. And the minute my tension feels it belongs, it stops being so interruptive to me. In this way, tension is like a little kid who wants your attention. And you say, okay. And the kid goes, oh, cool. You saw me. Thank you. And then the kid's incorporated into the activity of the day. And tension in the body is a little like that. Anything you want to get rid of in your body should be included in your work instead. So the great artistic act is an act of inclusion, to take that which you seek to exclude and instead pause and say, actually, how can I include this? When we do that, tension, the nature of it at least, tends to shift. And now I can sound my tension, I can express my tension, I can speak my tension, as opposed to tension interrupting the expression I was trying to offer.